So far this semester, we've been looking at the overarching narrative, the big story of the Bible. And I've made the argument that as human beings, our stories shape our decisions and our dreams, that we live out of our stories. I've also made the argument that the Bible is primarily one big story, the true story of our world. And to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, means living out of this story, accepting that this story defines what is true and good, allowing this story to shape our decisions and our dreams. To better understand the biblical story and to better grasp the big picture of the Bible, this semester we're dividing it into 7 sections or 7 acts. And so far we've looked at the first 2 acts. In Act 1, we saw how God, in an act of love and generosity, made a good world, a world that in its beauty reveals his heart and character. And he made human beings in his image to be his stewards, to reflect his love and wisdom to the world, to unleash the potential of God's creation through our own work and creativity. Last week, we looked at Act 2, often referred to as the fall. Act 2 shows how human beings, rather than living in a relationship of trust and dependency on God, instead we chose autonomy. We try to become like God. We choose to live apart from the wisdom and rule of God, and the consequences are catastrophic for our world. So what's next? What happens in Act 3? What will God do to fix this huge mess? How is he going to address not only the sin and rebellion that exists in every one of our own hearts, but how will he fix the destruction our decisions have brought on his creation? What will God do next? Well, in Act 3 of the biblical story, God begins to reveal his plan. And that plan is to form a people, a new family, a nation, a people who will worship him alone and who will model what it means to live as his image bearers in this world. And God says that through this new people, this new family, he will bless the world. He will rescue the world through them. But this plan has to start somewhere. And it starts with one man. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. So if you have a Bible, please turn to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 5. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Often when we talk about calling, about God having a call on people's lives, we usually think about people your age. Many of you during this season of life, when you're in college, you're thinking about your future and what God might want you to do with the next 50 or 60 years of your life. And we usually talk about calling in the context of our gifts, our talents, our passions, the things we're good at doing. We understand, and I think the scriptures affirm, that for most of us, we should not spend our lives doing things we're simply not gifted for. Anyone who has ever heard me sing out loud can be pretty certain that I'm not called to be a worship leader or opera singer. And if you've ever watched me try to do something as simple as putting together IKEA furniture, you would also know that I'm probably not called to be a carpenter or a mechanic. My brain is just not wired in those ways. But the strange thing about the biblical story is that when it comes to God calling people, he often chooses really unlikely people to be the key characters in moving his story, his rescue mission forward. Here we are at this crucial moment in God's story. It's the beginning of Act 3. God is about to launch his great rescue mission by forming a new nation. The entire fate of the world rests on this moment. God is going to use this people to redeem the entire created world from the devastation caused by our sin. And who does God choose? A barren couple in their 70s. How is God going to make this 75-year-old man the father of many nations? He and his wife can't even have a baby. Abram and Sarai are completely powerless to make this happen on their own. But maybe that's kind of the point. You see, throughout the biblical story, we'll see over and over how God chooses the broken, the flawed, and the weak to be his instruments for rescuing the world. And because of their weakness, because of their flaws, it becomes evident to a watching world that this is God's power, God's accomplishment. God is the hero of this story. Moses, who is called to speak truth to power, to declare to the great Egyptian Pharaoh liberation for the Hebrew slaves. Moses stuttered and was a murderer. David, the greatest king of Israel and the forefather of Jesus himself, was a runt, a shepherd, an adulterer, and a murderer too. The great apostle Paul hunted down Christians prior to his conversion. He was one of the great Pharisees of his day, someone who took great pride in his Jewish faith and ethnicity, yet he is called to be the apostle to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. And through shipwrecks, beatings, narrow escapes from mobs, debilitating sickness, and even imprisonment, he proclaims, "In my weakness, Christ's power is made perfect." I hope you see this as good news. Do you want to play a part in God's story? Do you want to be used by God? Do you want to have a role in bringing God's healing and life to those who are hurting? But when you look in the mirror, you think, nah, it's not going to happen with me. I don't have the faith. I don't have the gifts. I don't have the resources. I didn't grow up in the church. I have too many struggles. I've made too many mistakes. I've messed up too many times. God can't use me. I can't be a life group leader. I don't know enough about the Bible. I can't talk to my roommate about God because they might ask questions I don't know how to answer. I know I want to be this or to do that for a career, but I'm not going to apply to that grad school. I'm not really the type of person they're looking for. One of the great lessons of the biblical story is that God calls the unlikely. He uses the less thans. Yes, he calls us to develop the gifts he has given us. He calls us to study and to learn and to train. He calls us to be diligent and faithful in preparing for his call on our lives. But if we make ourselves available, he can use us in far greater ways that seem unimaginable to our limited vision and understanding. He can even take a barren couple in their 70s and make them the parents of a great nation that will rescue and redeem his world. But here's the thing. When God calls us, there is a cost. There is a cost to being part of his people. There's a cost to playing our part in the story, to living a life of mission. One of the really important things about Abram's encounter with God is that God calls Abram from one thing before he calls him to another. God calls Abram out of something before he calls him towards something else. Notice right in verse 1 that Abram is called to leave his country, to leave his people, and to leave his father's household. These would have been the primary sources of identity in Abram's life, and they still are in most people's lives today. In other words, God calls Abram to put aside all the things in which he would have found his value, his sense of belonging, and his security. It's not that Abram no longer will be who he is. God's not saying his national, ethnic, or familial identities no longer matter. They're an important part of who Abram is. But these things will no longer be the primary things that Abram finds his identity in. His primary identity will now be his faith, his relationship to the Creator God. This is going to be the unsettling or really challenging part of the talk tonight. You see, the same is true for us today. When God meets us, when we get to know Jesus, and when he invites us to follow him, to serve him, to be part of his mission in this world, he also calls us from one thing to another, from one identity to another. God calls us to no longer find our primary identity in our family, our nationality, our ethnic identity, our sexual identity, our major, our career, whether we're married or single, whether we're gay or straight, whether we're a Democrat or Republican, whether we're American or something else. He calls us to leave the familiar, to leave what's safe. He calls us to become a foreigner in our own land, to become an outsider, to be different, to have our citizenship in God's kingdom, to give our allegiance to a new king, to be in the world but not of the world. And it's not easy. It means living with a certain tension in life, a constant feeling like you don't quite fit in. Sometimes I talk with some of you and you say things like, I feel like it's so hard to be a Christian at UVM. This place never feels like home. I never feel like I fit in. I'm tired of it. I can't wait to leave. Well, I don't know how to say this other than to say it. You're not supposed to fit in. You're not supposed to feel at home here. And when you graduate, finally get out of here, if you're really following Jesus with the whole of your life, no matter where you go, you're not going to fit in there either. Let me put it this way. Are you okay being different? Are you okay being identified as a Christian at work or in class, even if it means you don't get the promotion or the internship or the TA position? Are you okay being a Christian when it comes to dating? Meaning that, we don't date like the rest of the culture. We don't participate in hookup culture. We don't numb ourselves or feel better about ourselves by using another person, also made in the image of God, for our own pleasure. Are you okay living as a Christian single person? Rather than thinking that since you're single, you've got the freedom to live for yourself without commitments, that you can use your free time however you want. Are you willing to be committed to people, to a community of faith, to serving your neighbors, to selfless love? If this Jesus thing is real in our lives, then God will call us out from the world's ways of determining value and worth and identity. And at some level, it won't be comfortable. People won't understand us, and we need to own that. It's okay. But here's the thing. While there's a cost to Abram answering God's call, his call to leave home, it also comes with a promise, a blessing. God told Abram to leave his three sources of security, his country, his relatives, and his father's house. Yet God promises to replace all three. Abram, leave your homeland. I promise to give you a new land to live in. Leave your family. I promise to give you a new one. Leave your source of blessing, your father's household, and I promise to bless you myself. When we say yes to God, when we say yes to serving Christ with the whole of our lives, there is a cost. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes we have to leave behind dreams and relationships and comfort and security. But God also promises to give us so much more in return. I want to show you a picture here. This is a picture of my college diploma. As you can see, I received a Bachelor of Music degree, yes, a BM, from the New England Conservatory of Music. I majored in clarinet performance and minored in music education. You can also see that I graduated with academic honors. But the thing that is most significant to me is that little gold seal there that says distinction in performance. Distinction in performance is the the highest honor that an undergraduate can receive from NEC. And I didn't know I was getting it until I walked into my commencement ceremony and saw the program. But here's why it means so much to me. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that I became a follower of Jesus when I was in college. God had revealed himself to me in some wonderful ways. And Jesus had shown me his love and forgiveness, and he had given me something to live for, something to build my life on. But the more I got involved with my Chi Alpha group, the more I started to see just how important and strategic campus ministry was. I started leading a Bible study and then became the student president for a Chi Alpha chapter. And I found myself getting more and more joy and fulfillment from sharing Christ with other students and from discipling them. And I started to sense that God might be calling me to become a campus missionary, to give my life to doing what I do now with all of you, serving students, teaching students about Jesus, building Christian community on campuses, preparing students to serve Christ beyond the university. But leaving behind my dream of becoming a professional musician was not easy. Some of you might be able to relate, but music wasn't something I just majored in college. This was something I'd given hours and hours of my life to from a very young age. I started playing the clarinet in the 2nd grade. That's a lot of private lessons and practicing and rehearsing through the years. I had given up full scholarships to prestigious universities to attend music school. I had sacrificed a lot for this music dream. And I still loved music. I loved making music. I loved expressing myself through music. How could I walk away from it all? When I told my family that I was considering doing an internship with Chi Alpha to train to become a campus pastor, my mom wept over the phone. My brother told me I was throwing my life away. Needless to say, my clarinet teacher in college was not thrilled with my decision. And I'll never forget talking to a freshman towards the end of my senior year of college. We were having lunch together in the cafeteria, and he said, sort of flippantly, "Oh yeah, I heard about you when I got to college. You were supposed to be really good, but then you got religious and threw it all away." His words were like a knife cutting into my heart. When you go to music school, the culmination of your studies is your senior recital. You perform in front of your family and friends and your colleagues. And I'll never forget the last note of the last movement of the last piece of my recital. As that note rung out and faded into silence, my heart ached. I felt such sadness because I knew it was all coming to an end. Like Abram, God was calling me to leave. But here's the thing that's so incredible. You see, when I walked into my graduation ceremony and I saw that I was being awarded distinction and performance, it was like this little message from God. Yes, Joe, I called you to give up something very precious to you. There's a cost to my calling, but I will also bless you. You may have walked away from certain professional dreams and jobs and success, but I'll still bless you. No, you may not end up playing in the Boston Symphony one day, but here's a little recognition of your gifts and talents. You're not walking away a failure. I went back to my dorm room after graduation. I sat in my bed and I wept for 20 minutes. The only other time I've wept like that is when my father died a couple of years ago. I wept over the death of certain dreams, but I also wept out of thankfulness for the goodness and faithfulness of God. Over the last 20 years, I've seen God's hand of blessing on my life. I've experienced so many rich and wonderful friendships. I've gotten to see God transform so many students' lives, and I've gotten to play just a small role in that. I've seen students set free from addiction, healed from brokenness, discover God's love and acceptance. Shoot, I met a wonderful woman and got married, and we've got 3 beautiful children. I thought being a missionary meant I would live in poverty, but God has blessed us with a beautiful home for our family. When I open Facebook or read the art section of the New York Times and I see some former classmate conducting the New York Philharmonic or playing in a major symphony orchestra, Do I sometimes feel a pang of regret? Do I sometimes mourn a bit? Sure. But I also see how God has been so good to me. There's this moment in Mark's gospel when Jesus tells this rich young ruler to sell all of his possessions and to give the money to the poor and then to come and follow him. And this rich guy, he can't do it. He walks away from Jesus. But Peter pipes up, "What about us, Jesus? We've left everything to follow you." And Jesus replies, "Truly I tell you, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life." I know this is true firsthand. One author put it this way. He said, "We are a sent people. God's command to Abram is to go. Yet this is a command with a promise, a summons with assurance, and I will make your name great." God's promises to Abram are what we all crave. What do I want you to take away from all this tonight? We often think of Christianity, of being a Christian, as an individual pursuit. It's about me and my relationship with God. It's about where I go after I die. But to be honest with you, that's not really the point of the biblical story. God's story is about how he calls men and women to become part of a new people. The Apostle Paul calls it a new humanity, a new family, the church. To follow Jesus means leaving behind, or at least relegating all other identities and all other sources of security to become part of this people, to live a life of mission, to be part of God's rescue plan, to be a child of Abraham. And God always calls his people to go to the orphan, the widow, the stranger, the broken, the suffering, the marginalized, the hurt, the lost, the seeking. To go to the nations, to go to this neighborhood or that city or this office building or even that university campus. And so there is a cost. There's a cost to leaving what is safe and familiar to go where God calls us. But there's also blessing. Where is God calling you to go? Who is God calling you to go to? Maybe God has plans for you, a dream for your life, a role for you to play in this rescue mission that today you could never imagine. Maybe he wants to use you to impact people, to bring his kingdom life, his love and his healing to people in ways that if I told you today, you wouldn't even believe me. Maybe he'll call you overseas to reach people and plant churches, or to engage in compassionate service, to provide health care, or design water or electrical systems in the majority world. Maybe he'll call you to impact children in an inner city public school, or to bring his presence and light to a rural hospital or a tribal community health clinic as a nurse or doctor. Or maybe he'll call you to reach and disciple young men and women on one of the most strategic mission fields in the world, the New England University campus. And what might you have to leave behind if you're going to fulfill his purpose for your life? Your parents' approval? A dream about having a certain job or a certain salary or a certain kind of lifestyle? An identity rooted in a relationship or a socioeconomic status or an ethnic group? Wealth, power, status, success? But in leaving, will you trust him? Will you trust his promises to bless you and to make you a blessing to this world? Will you go?